Georgia, 1829. Dawn cracked the sky open like a whip. Pale light spread over the endless rows of cotton, the stalks heavy with dew, their white buds gleaming like false pearls against the dark soil. The air smelled of wet earth and sweat, though no one had yet been allowed to sweat. Before labor began, there was ritual born not of necessity, but of cruelty. Henry Cole, the overseer, stood tall in his boots at the edge of the field, the handle of his whip tapping against his thigh like a drumbeat. He was a man who smiled too often, but never kindly. His smile came when others bent, when others cried, when others failed to meet his gaze. The slaves feared his anger, but they feared his laughter more. "Line up," he ordered. The voices of the morning birds fell silent as the men shuffled into formation, shoulders slumped, eyes fixed on the ground. One by one they pulled off their shirts, folding them with care despite the trembling of their hands. Some were fathers, some were sons, all were property, and as their backs, scarred and welted, caught the rising sun, Cole's grin widened. He stepped before them like a general reviewing troops he despised. "Let's see how sharp the whip sings today." He cracked it once in the air, and the sound tore through the dawn like thunder without clouds. Then came the strikes, one lash for a man who coughed, another for a boy who blinked too long, another for no reason at all. Cole laughed with each crack, urging them to pretend it was a game. Mary, only 17, was called forward. Thin from hunger, but with eyes that still carried defiance, she hesitated a second too long. That was enough. "On your knees," Cole said. "Crawl." She dropped to the mud, her dress soaking instantly, her hands sinking into the cold filth. He forced her to crawl the length of the line, while the men watched, their faces masks of stone. Behind her, the old man Joseph, his back stooped with 50 years of labor, was ordered to kneel before Cole's boots. "Kiss them," the overseer barked. Joseph pressed his lips against the leather, tasting mud, iron, and the faint tang of blood from those whipped before him. Laughter was demanded. "Smile, all of you. Laugh with me," Cole shouted. But those who dared not contort their faces in false joy were promised the lash. So the sound rose, jagged, broken, hollow. Forced chuckles, thin as paper, carried across the field. The overseer's whip cracked again to punctuate the music he alone enjoyed. It was not punishment. It was theater, a stage of humiliation where bodies became props and dignity was ground into mud. By noon the field shimmered with heat, cotton weighed heavy, hands moved mechanically, and backs dripped with sweat. But the memory of dawn lingered sharper than the sun. Mary's knees bruised, Joseph's lips pressed to filth, the overseer's laugh echoing like a curse that refused to fade. Night brought no rest. The slave cabins squatted on the edge of the field, their roofs sagging, their walls riddled with cracks that let in the winter's breath and summer's insects alike. Inside, the air was heavy with damp rot. The straw on the floor was black with mildew. Families huddled close not for warmth, but to keep rats from crawling over children left too weak to stir. A loaf of stale cornbread was passed from hand to hand, each person tearing a fragment small enough to shame hunger, but not silence it. Water was fetched from a ditch, thick with the buzzing of mosquitoes. Mothers chewed bitter herbs to soften them before feeding them to infants, so the little ones might at least taste something not drenched in despair. In that darkness, voices were low, almost swallowed by the walls themselves. To complain was to vanish. Everyone knew it. Some had seen it. Men dragged out at midnight, women pulled from their beds without a cry. By morning, their clothes hung on the fence beside the field, flapping in the wind like ghosts, a warning to those who dared to think themselves more than tools. Yet memory remained. Memory, even in silence, has sharp edges. Old Joseph whispered prayers in a language half forgotten, words his grandmother had carried from another continent. Mary lay awake, her knees raw, eyes open to the cracks in the ceiling where moonlight slipped through. She remembered crawling, remembered Cole's laughter, remembered the eyes of her people forced to look away. And in corners, in whispers covered by coughs, or the cry of infants, thoughts of revolt sparked. They were not plans yet, only embers. A murmur that asked, "How long can this last?" A glance exchanged when Cole's back was turned, a hand tightening too firmly on the handle of a hoe. But fear was stronger. Fear pressed its weight on every chest, whispering of whips, of dogs, of ropes. Fear had smothered embers before. Fear would smother them again. Still, fear does not erase memory. And memory, in silence, grows heavy, like storm clouds gathering unseen beyond the horizon. Georgia, 1829. Noon burned like judgment. The cotton rose shimmered, and the overseer's shadow stretched long enough to swallow a man whole. Daniel was 19, quick with a psalm when no one listened, careful with his eyes. Careful, until that moment. He looked up. Only a heartbeat. Only a glance that said, "I am still here." Henry Cole saw it. He smiled the way a wolf shows teeth. "On the ground," he said, voice casual as dust. Daniel lowered himself slowly, palms flat to the hot earth. The others kept picking, hands moving while hearts stalled. The whip hissed, then cracked. The sound tore the field in two. Again. Again. The rhythm turned cruel and steady, a drumbeat for the old music of power. Daniel bit his lip, but would not cry out. The sky went bright and far. The world narrowed to heat, salt, and iron. "Look away," Cole called to the line. "No one wants to see a boy learn his lessons." They looked away, because survival is an art. But they heard everything. The breaths that shortened, the meat sound of leather, the small prayer Mary swallowed, the single cough Joseph could not. When Daniel finally stilled, quiet as a dropped handkerchief, Cole stepped back, the whip slack as a dead snake. "Leave him," he said. "Let the sun cover him." They were forbidden to touch the body, forbidden to shade him, to close his eyes, to speak his name as if it might rise and refuse orders. The field hands kept moving, each step measured, each pick a denial of panic. Flies arrived first, low and greedy. Buzzards circled as if they'd read the ledger. Old Joseph straightened as far as his back allowed. He was tired of swallowing air. Loud enough for the wind to carry and the brave to hear, he said, "Today him, tomorrow us." The words hung there, bright as sparks in dry grass. Not a shout, a truth, the kind you can't unhear once it's spoken. Eyes met, only for a blink, only at the edges, but the line of silence snapped like twine under weight. By evening, the heat had cooled, but not the fury. Daniel lay in the dirt, a lesson written in flesh. Cole walked past twice to admire his handwriting. In the cabins, dust pooled like old blood. Hunger paced the floor. Children dozed against ribs that felt like lattice. The cornbread was thinner than grief. Mary washed mud from her knees with ditch water and let her hands go still. Her throat carried a new tightness, a thread drawn hard through cloth. No one spoke at first. The overseer's laughter still clung to the rafters. Then the coughs began, planned, practiced, ordinary to a listening ear, shelter for a different kind of speech. Under coughs, under the scrape of a spoon, came counting. 1, said a voice, soft. 2, not numbers for seed or sacks, but for hands willing, hearts ready. Old Joseph's eyes shone the way eyes do when a river remembers its source. He did not command. He reminded. They spoke in broken phrases, patched like old clothes. Not plans yet, shapes of plans. Words like stone and iron and night. A date that had always owned them. Harvest. The owners feasted then. Wine loosened hands that gripped whips. Music drowned footsteps. Fires burned high. Shadows ran deeper. Harvest night was the white folks' holiday. So harvest night would be the enslaved people's hour. Tools, Mary whispered. Tools, Joseph answered, and the word meant we asterisk p asterisk n now. They gathered the dull things that had always kissed their palms. Sickles nicked by too many summers, hoes tired but heavy, broken chains coiled like sleeping snakes, hand-sized stones smooth from years of pockets. Nothing new, only old objects given a new purpose. In the morning they would still look like work. At night they would remember another name. A young boy, Cato, offered a length of rusted chain. Found it by the smokehouse, he said. The metal smelled of rain and years. Joseph took it, tested its weight, nodded without praise. Praise was for later, if there was a later. Fear came too, faithful as moonrise. It stood in the doorway and asked its question. What happens when we fail? The answer was simple. Rope. Fire. Dogs. Names erased. But another question pressed harder. What happens when we do nothing? They already knew that answer. Daniel was the answer, cooling on the edge of the field while the crickets sang, as if night were innocent. Mary remembered his song, a small thing he hummed while picking, a hum that smuggled happiness across borders. She tasted grit. The song was over. The silence it left behind throbbed like a wound. They chose no leader, not because they lacked one, but because they had many. A glance, a hand, a grandfather's nod, a girl's lowered eyelids, a shared rhythm when no drum was allowed. Leadership would draw a line for G** and S to follow. Instead, they drew a circle and stood inside it. Harvest night, Joseph said, and the words wore the weight of a vow. When the moon is high and the big house is drunk with itself. They practiced pretending. In daylight, obedience became performance. Backs bent further. Yes, Mr. Sweeter. Hands slower to lift their heads. The lazy man is overlooked. The quiet woman becomes furniture. They hid their eyes inside themselves. Meanwhile, they counted doors, measured steps from porch to well, timed the overseer's rounds by the squeak of leather and the length of a cigarette. They learned the house's breathing. In the evenings, they met at the far corner, where the quarters kissed the treeline. Coughs covered talk. Hymns hid strategy. They sang of Jordan and met the back gate. They sang of crossing over and met the line where cotton ended and pine began. Joseph's voice carried the low earth of an older country. Mary's voice laid a blade under the melody. Children were trained in silence. Babies slept with cloth at the ready, not to harm but to keep breath from selling secrets. The elders braided messages into hair and baskets, patterns that told time, routes, the difference between wisdom and haste. Even the rats became informants, scurrying where crumbs fell from the big house after wine. The wee asterisk P asterisk NS grew slowly, the way a storm grows beyond the horizon, piece by piece, breath by breath. A hoehead wrapped in rags to muffle the knock. A sickle sharpened on the sly against a stone that looked like any other. A rope twisted not for tying cotton, but for stopping a man from calling out. They looked at their hands and saw them new. Not tools, not property, not proof of someone else's wealth. Hands that could close into justice. Hands that could refuse. Cole did not see it. He saw only what he taught himself to see. Fear made into skin, obedience sewn into the soles of feet. He strutted the rows, whip trailing in easy line. He joked about the coming harvest, about the barrels of gin, about how the night air made his pistol sing. He kicked Daniel's body once more, then had it dragged to the fence where clothes warned the living. In the morning, 2 boys did the dragging. They did not look at the face. They did not need to. They had memorized it already. On the 3rd night after the whipping, thunder rolled somewhere far off, a sermon rehearsing itself. The sky smelled like iron and wet rope. The cabins pulsed with a strange quiet, not empty, not afraid, tight as a drawn bow. Mary lay awake, palms flat, feeling the planks hum, with footsteps from another room. She pictured the big house lit like a lighthouse against souls. She pictured the table, the bottles, the heavy sleep of men who believed themselves chosen by God and cotton. She pictured them unchained by liquor, unaware of how chains remember. She rose, opened the door. The night air tasted clean after a day of dust. At the corner, figures moved like shadows doing math. How many? Someone asked. Enough, Joseph said. And more than enough if our courage holds. Mary touched the sickle's curve. Cold, patient. It did not care about names or bloodlines. It only knew harvest. Harvest night, Joseph repeated, as if the words themselves were a tool. We go when the music is loudest. Where first? Cato asked. Fires, Mary answered. Not to burn the world, to blind it. They nodded. Plans hardened. Not into maps, but into muscle memory. Who takes the lamp oil? Who slips the latch? Who gathers the children and folds them into the dark? One man would break the G**N rack window, not to steal. There was nothing there for him, but to cripple what hunted him. 2 women would cut the stable ropes, set the horses loose, send chaos galloping. If fear came, they would treat it like smoke. Hold a cloth to the mouth. Keep moving. Trust the air beyond it. Outside, the clouds gathered in secret councils. Inside, Daniel's name was folded into every breath. No drums, no flags, no speeches, only the low thrum of a people deciding to breathe differently. When the moon climbed the sky like a slow, white blade, the field answered with a wind that bent every stalk in one direction, as if even the cotton had chosen a side. Georgia, 1829. Harvest night crept in like a cat with wet paws, silent, precise, uninvited. In the big house, lamps bloomed along the veranda and violins tuned their bright lies. In the quarters, no one ate. No one slept. Breath moved in shallow tides, as if lungs feared to wake the dark. Inside the dining room, the masters and their guests feasted. Turkey steamed under a gloss of fat. Wines reddened lips that pronounced the word order as if it were scripture. They laughed about markets, about yields, about bodies counted like crates. A silver bell toast rose high. To prosperity. The crystal replied with 1,000 tiny chimes, each one a nail. Mary stood by the service door, tray balanced, eyes lowered. She looked at the candle flames and saw not light but measurements. How quickly wax fell. How long until men grew sleepy. How far from table to pistol drawer. Faces floated in the shine. Henry Cole's among them, smug with drink. Across the room, the mistress's pearls clicked against the glass like little bones. A fiddler scraped a jig, a woman clapped in lace. The house smelled of clove and deceit. At the edge of the field, night made a different music. Cato crouched by the shed door, chain coiled in his palm like a tame snake remembering the forest. Old Joseph waited near the split-rail fence, hat low, hands open, eyes bright with something older than fear. Behind him, shadows gathered, shaped like people who had finally returned to themselves. The moon drifted out of cloud and cut the rose and silver lanes. Each row a path, each path a choice. The plan was simple because simple survives. Oil for lamp wicks, latches to lift, doors to wedge, hooves to loose, AG** and rack to empty and feed to the creek. Fire not for burning worlds, but for blinding eyes. Noise used sparingly, silence, as ever, used like a blade. When Mary slipped back to the kitchen, she touched the edge of a sickle hidden under a sack of meal. Cold met skin, purpose met breath. She looked to the corner, where 2 girls sat polishing spoons they would never taste. When the music grows loud, she whispered, "Take the little ones and run to the oak. Count to 100 slow. If we don't come, keep going." They nodded, faces small and fierce. Children had been told all their lives to be silent. Tonight the silence belonged to them. Back in the parlor, Henry Cole swaggered toward the veranda to smoke. The guests parted for him as if cruelty were a perfume. He lifted his glass to the yard, as if toasting the fields themselves. "Fine night," he said. His laugh stumbled on the stair. Old Joseph heard the door hinge breathe. He glanced once at the men and women beside him, then at the moon, then at the house. He did not speak. He moved. 3 steps from shadow to step. 2 beats of a heart. 1 loop of chain over a living throat. Cole's fingers found air where his pistol should have been. Cato had already taken it, boy's hands quick as minnows. The chain tightened, not to crush, but to lead. Cole choked on his own swagger, dragged forward into the grass, eyes wide at the shape of the sky. He kicked once. The chain answered with a small, final music. Across the yard, a lamp shattered against the stable wall, spraying stars. Horses lifted their heads, smelling a future. 2 women cut the lines and slapped flanks, hooves threw thunder into the night. In the hallway, a lantern was kissed to darkness by a blessed gust. The big house blinked. Mary stepped through the service door and let the tray fall. Silver met floor in a scatter of moons. The dining room paused, that soft golden pause of people whose safety has never been questioned. Then a man laughed, assuming clumsiness. "Girls' hands," someone said, and the room resumed chewing. The second lantern went out. The third. A fiddler stopped mid-note, bow hanging in the air like a question. "What's this?" asked the mistress. No one answered, because answers require time, and time had turned. Mary reached the sideboard. The sickle slid into her hand as if it had been shaped by her palm years ago. Two men rose at once, reflex, not courage. She moved past them without touching. A current, a hush with weight. At the doorway, a guard's shoulder found the heel of a hoe, and night rushed into his eyes. Another man grabbed for the bell rope. A stone found his knuckles before the thought could finish. Old Joseph crossed the threshold with a slow, exact mercy. No screaming, he said calmly to the nearest overseer. You've spent your whole life telling others to hush. Learn it. The chain spoke for him. The man learned. In the confusion, a guest overturned a chair, splinters snapping like a dry twig. The mistress pressed both hands to her pearls as if they were prayer beads, and for once she prayed to something real, the weight on her own ribs. Mary put a finger to her lips. Hush, and the woman obeyed, astonished to discover that obedience could move both ways. Horses tore the night wider. Somewhere a window broke on purpose. Somewhere a child counted to 9 and forgot what came next, and a sister said softly, 10. And again. The air smelled of lamp oil, sweat, and a new thing, unnamed and exact. Henry Cole thrashed once more in the grass, a final performance, without an audience. Old Joseph leaned close. Today him, he had said. Tomorrow us. He watched the truth revise itself. Not tomorrow, he breathed. Tonight. Mary threaded the hallway, finding the rooms by memory, not sight. She knew which floorboard promised a squeal, which step hid a nail, which door's lock lived inside a temper. In the G*N room, she threw the bolts open and sent the long iron sleepwalkers to the ground. One by one, they fell like lies ending. Cato dragged 2 to the back, where the creak received them without questions. Back in the dining room, panic tried to form a shape. It failed. Panic is a luxury of those who believe time favors them. Here, time had slipped its leash. A guest raised his voice, as if volume could purchase authority. Old Joseph's eyes flicked toward Mary. She nodded once. He stepped to the man and, with the simple decency of a teacher, removed the words from his mouth. The night exhaled. Some ran. They slipped on their own spilled wine, on their certainty, on the polished floor that had never learned to bear weight. Others hid behind curtains, behind prayers, behind their family names. Names did not answer. The walls did not side with anyone. On the veranda, a fiddler lowered his bow, then lifted it again to a different tune, low and steady, a heart made audible. A few took it up without meaning to, feet marking time, blood finding a rhythm that had once been forbidden and now was simply true. Windows, Mary said. The word moved like a bird from mouth to mouth. Latches rose. Night rushed in clean. The overseers who were still breathing reached at last for order, for the old anchors, command, threat, the promise of tomorrow's lash. But tomorrow had been canceled. Their hands closed on air. A chain met a wrist. A rope met a lie. A stone met the floor where a sh*t would have sounded, and there was no sh*t. In the parlor, the mistress sank into a chair, pearls quiet for the first time in their maid lives. She looked at Mary, the girl she had called girl for years, and saw a woman. Not a symbol, not a sermon, not a servant. A person who had chosen the hour and found it good. The mistress's mouth opened, then shut. For once, she learned the usefulness of silence. On the grass beyond the veranda, Henry Cole's boots gleamed faintly in the moonlight. Cato stared at them, then at his own bare feet, and felt the ground decide he belonged to it. He tied the chain in a neat coil, the way his mother had braided his hair when he was small, tidy, necessary done. Old Joseph stepped back into the hall and listened. Not for the enemy, for completion. Sometimes victory is loud. Sometimes it is the absence of a particular sound. He listened for the crack of leather and heard only breathing, hoofbeat, violin, and the small, bright noise of glass settling after a table has been struck. Mary walked to the threshold of the dining room. Dawn was a rumor at the windows. Behind her, the house was full of a new weather. In front of her, the fields held their breath. Enough, she said, and the word traveled, folding itself around wrists, around throats, around the last drifting pieces of fear. It was not a command. It was a verdict. It meant, we came as far as this night asked. It meant, save the living. It meant, tomorrow we bury our dead and reclaim their names from the fence. They gathered the children. They opened the yard gate. They lifted Daniel gently from the place where the sun had been ordered to cover him and gave that labor back to human hands. The sky paled. The big house stood, altered. The cotton rows faced east, white crowns ready to witness. The world did not roar. It steadied. And in that steadiness, the enslaved felt the old clock stop and a new one begin, its first tick soft as a heartbeat and just as irreversible. Dawn crawled out of the swamps thin and pale, and the fields answered with silence where orders used to live. By first light the rose wore a dark sheen, the kind a sky keeps to itself after thunder. Bodies lay where the night had argued its case. Not spectacle, not glory, only balance paid late. Smoke clung to the veranda like a second set of curtains. In the yard, Henry Cole's boots faced the wrong way, as if his feet finally tried to flee the rest of him. The few overseers who slipped the chain of the night rode hard for town, hats crooked, pistols slapping thighs, mouths flinging words the wind did not keep. Savage massacre. They yelped, as if the dogs were finally chasing them. The sheriff's men stared, stricken by the sight of white fear moving like a flock. Newspapers would turn that fright into ink by noon. Madness, bloodlust, barbarity, sentences swiveling to avoid the mirror. But in the cabins, the mornings settled different. There, justice meant weight removed from a chest that had forgotten how air was shaped. Mothers counted children. Elders counted names. The living counted minutes between hoofbeats and the clink of a far-off gate. Someone boiled water. Someone hid tools that had become holy. Someone covered Daniel's face with a clean scrap of cloth and spoke a blessing from a language this land had tried to bury. Mary washed her hands at the pump, the chill biting bone. Every scrape along her knuckles felt like a line drawn through yesterday. Old Joseph straightened as much as his back allowed and set his hat upon his head the way men do for funerals and oaths. Cato stared at the chain he'd coiled neat on the stoop. Then he carried it to the creek and let the water take the old music from its links. Around mid-morning, riders appeared at the far fence, small at first, then multiplying like flies. The house folk braced for the version of morning the town would bring, rope and law braided into one loud certainty. Mary gathered the children toward the oak's shadow, where roots knew how to keep breath quiet. Joseph stood in the doorway of a ruined order, palms open, as if greeting bad weather with old manners. When the posse reached the yard, they found what they expected and what they did not. The big house still stood, but its walls had learned to listen. The veranda wore scuffs from heels that had not meant to leave. No trophies, no taunts, only the hush that follows decision. A deputy pointed at Mary. "Who led this?" he demanded, needing a shape to punish, a single head for his hatchet. She did not answer. Not cowardice, discipline. The night had not elected a king. It had chosen a clock, and everyone had become the hour. They dragged 3 men from the cabins at random. Joseph stepped forward to stand with them and was struck for the habit. He did not fall. "Charge us then," he said softly, "but speak the charge true." The deputy smirked, satisfied to find something he understood. "Murder," he said. "Murder," Joseph repeated, tasting the word like a seed. "That is a tool with 2 handles." By noon the papers hit porch rails in town, hot as stove lids. Words marched, uprising quelled, order restored, reports of northern agitation. In the bottom corner a column rehearsed Henry Cole's virtues, firm, charitable, a man of Christian regulation, sentences polished till they squeaked. No column named Daniel beyond boy. None placed a last word in his mouth. Ink is obedient, memory is not. That night, a scaffold went up by the cotton scales, quick carpentry over old blood. 3 men were led there under a sky that had already seen too much. Joseph among them. He was given a prayer he did not ask for and offered a hood he refused. He looked past the crowd to the treeline, to a shade that might have been a river or a road. "Today him," he had said. "Tomorrow us." He lifted his chin. "And after us still the truth," he added now, so low only the rope heard it. They kicked the boards. The crowd made the noise crowds make when they think they have tamed a season. In the cabins, Mary held the children and kept count, not of deaths, but of lessons. She planned burial for Daniel at dawn, a deep patch where no plow would betray him. She planned a song for the little ones that sounded like a lullaby, but carried a map. She planned which names to whisper into which ears, and which to leave wrapped for another century. The plantation changed its shape without moving. Doors got locks they had never needed. G** and S found new shelves. The mistress prayed with a fervor that had nothing to do with God. Patrols thickened like summer gnats. Chains were weighed on scales meant for cotton. Preachers rehearsed sermons about meekness until the words dulled in their jaws. Still, the whisper outlived the sermon. Across the county line, men at supper lowered their spoons when someone said Henry Cole. The name did not stand upright anymore. It sagged. It cracked. It warned. Mary did not become a headline. She became the person in the corner of the room who watches the door and knows the door is watching back. She learned the taste of patience again, this time not as obedience, but as a tool. She taught Cato how to step off a road when riders come, how to smile like furniture, how to lift the right thing at the right second and live to tell it twice. She kept a shard of mirror wrapped in cloth beneath her mat, not to admire the face, but to send a sliver of sun across a far field when the next hour asked. Years would call the night madness, because memory makes its own weather to protect itself. But here, where cotton still whitens like a false mercy, they called it by its working name. Justice, not clean, not final, not enough, but moving. A lever found, a hinge made, a door cracked, and Henry Cole. He remained in the yard only as a posture the wind no longer respected. Children walked past the spot and felt taller. Men passed it and loosened their shoulders without thinking. Women passed it and did not lower their eyes. The field learned a new sound, the slow, patient rhythm of a people who had measured the night and found their hands equal to its weight. Even the chain can rise and strike